get the purchase price driven down because they were, scared. So now they actually get their wish and get the money knocked off, and the roof's not falling apart. It's just 15 years old. They're 17 years old. So that's why we asked it to be repaired or replaced.
Here we go.
Is it hail damage or is it just falling apart?
There's rust on all the flashings. There's rust on all the pipes. The flashings are cracked. There's hail damage in certain places, debris up there. There's no leaks. It's something that could last another year or two. Something might go wrong, but
As long as there's no squirrels in the attic, you should be fine.
right. But it's enough for us to ask them to have them replace it, and I'm willing to take off the replacement costs off the purchase price. So win-win.
Well, the buyer's aware of what's going on, so you're covered.
Right.
Well, let's jump in, get going. We got a lot to cover again. We made it through the first 7 sections the other day. We're going to jump into section 8 right off the bat, try and finish up, get through the end before noon. I guess just right off the bat, section 8, title insurance record title and off record title. Any thoughts and techniques on these first 3 sections, 8.11, 8.12, and 8.13? I'm going to go.
Pays.
Well, 8.1 and 8.2, 8.11 and 8.12 is exactly who pays the actual title insurance. I think that this is, this is something I think that could be used these days for buyers' incentives or a seller incentive from your buyer. What's the standard cost of title insurance? Anybody know?
Dependent upon the price of the property. Dictated
by the price of the property, right? Exactly. Yep. If you've got a $500,000 house, I think you're probably looking around $1,500. This is something that I got in, this last weekend. One of the buyers offered to, actually the buyer's agent is covering the cost of the insurance up to $1,500.
Wow.
Right. So that was something that I had kind of encountered that I'd never seen before. I've done it to where I've had the buyers select the title insurance company and cover the cost to try and help net the seller some additional funds. Is this something when you have an exclusive right and you're serving or you're working with a customer? Is this something that you can flip-flop? I guess more specifically, I had an investor purchase one of my listings and I represented him as a customer. I stuck him with the title insurance, buyer selects, and I put in there who the title insurance company was. And then when we got to actual closing, he found out that he was paying for this and was not happy.
Well, that's kind of his idea. It's not something you need to tell him to do because you don't have fiduciary responsibilities when he's a customer.
Which is why I did it.
There you go.
Which is why I did it. Owner's extended coverage. What is this and what does it cover?
It extends past any unforeseen liens or encumbrances that were not disclosed at the time of sale.
Parties in possession, unrecorded easement, survey matters, unrecorded mechanics liens, gapped periods between the effective date and the time it was committed date. This is any unpaid taxes, assessments, anything that should arise in the future that was unforeseen. This definitely is the coverage that you would want. Does anybody know what the cost of the OEC coverage is?
A little bit more.
$70.
$5 more.
$65, $75?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth $65 or $75 for this coverage?
Oh yeah.
Definitely. I would always encourage your buyers to even if they have to pay for this, that this is a buyer expense if needed. And especially in this market, I think that you might as well just take on the $65 because it benefits your buyer.
Yep.
Any thoughts, comments, questions about these 3 sections? Pretty straightforward. Title. What do we know about title? Is anybody a title attorney? Yeah, Thomas. Once again,
state of New Jersey is an attorney state. So basically, I used to do all of the title company work. So I used to review title and things like that because in New Jersey, the attorney actually replaces the title company, so to speak.
There you go. Do we get involved with any title matters as agents?
No.
You don't want to.
Thomas, I have
Yeah.
a question. Can you share your phone number in case we need a lawyer on speed dial?
Would you like me to share it now?
Well, I don't care. You could, I don't know if you're comfortable with that, but I'd like to put you in my phone.
I think it would be a great thing for everybody to put Thomas's number. Thomas and I were talking this morning. He gets phone calls when it's a reactive situation instead of the proactive situation. So I say, Thomas, if you're down, let's share your number right now, loud and proud.
How about it? I sent it
Okay.
out on chat. Everybody get it?
There you go.
Okay. Yeah,
Here we
thank
go.
you very much.
Thomas DeJong, 720-437-3186.
You dyslexic, Jared?
720-473-3186.
Very well. Very good. I was paying attention.
It was a test. You passed. But yeah, once again, hey, Thomas, thanks for being here with us. He's definitely going to be our go-to guy for any of these questions. I think this is, in my regard to title, when we get title commitments, it's really our responsibility to facilitate and ensure that our clients receive those title commitments. But when there's questions that should arise, I think that we have to remember that we're not title attorneys. If there's a question about maybe an easement on the property, if there's questions about mineral rights on the property, that's not really something that we should get involved in, nor should we advise. I think that that's kind of where we have the objection, the title objection and title resolution periods in our dates and deadlines. Anybody have any experience with actually needing to object to any title issues?
Not really.
I was working with Cece recently, and it was more, she's on the buy side. Her buyers have what's to be an easement behind the neighbor's property to access their garage, but there's no known recorded easement. It's unknown whether or not this is recorded.
Oh, boy.
She sends me the title commitment and says, "Hey, can you help me find this?" And I believe it was Cece. Maybe I'm wrong. Can you help me find the easement, the recorded easement for this property? And what was my advice? Do I want to say yes and then it's not there? Absolutely not. So instead, I encouraged her to submit a title objection to the seller and actually require that the seller ensure that the easement's there.
Can't you search it in county records, the clerk's office, county clerk?
Well, you would get it on that title commitment. It would be recorded if it was, and that's the thing. They couldn't find it, but that's because it wasn't. So I think that that's where, one of the title objections that they submitted was that the seller was required to actually have that recorded prior to closing. Any thoughts on title, Thomas?
No, and what you just said basically is very true. You want to get that recorded, especially if it's, your buyer, so to speak, because there are different easements, right? You have one where that's actually documented, and there's things called the prospective easement where it's been in use for a really long time, or it's required because you can't actually access the property without that easement. But, clearly the best way to do it is to have it actually documented.
Here's kind of here's a part that I think sometimes when you're dealing with rural property, section 8.7 title advisory, 871, 872, 73, 74, 75. How does it work with oil and gas mineral rights? Do most properties come with their mineral rights? Yes or no?
No,
No.
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 those were taken away by Union Pacific back in the 1800s.
Long ago. And that's absolutely, most cases are true. If you ever review a title commitment, most property owners don't own their mineral rights. What this is saying in this portion is if you don't own those mineral rights, they have rights to the estate. They have rights to access that property and access their mineral rights. I think that that's something that we have to remind and touch on. 8.8 is the next best part, consultant attorney. What happens if you sell a property and we don't help advise them that this is actually in the contract, and then they come to find out that they don't own the mineral rights, and not only that, somebody's accessing their rights? Who's liable?
Hello.
Whoopsie. Right?
Yeah,
I think that that's, I lost $1 million contract because I advised them of this portion. And the reason I lost the contract is because they consulted the attorney and the attorney ended up with the deal. Whoops.
I promise to not do that.
I trust you, Thomas. I
I
do.
promise not to do that. It's bad juju.
It's bad juju. Well, and it was their right. They decided to actually go with that attorney, and they had the right to actually go with the attorney. I wasn't upset about it. I also wasn't liable at that point either.
True.
Right. But that's also why I ensured that I advised them, hey, that you guys you don't own the mineral rights, and not only that, you have to speak with an attorney if you want to get more specifics about it. Any thoughts, comments, questions about title? I think the biggest piece is ensuring that that they understand what's taking place, that they understand that the mineral rights aren't attached, that there could be off-record elements. Section 8.11, 8.12, who's paying for the actual title insurance company and the policy, and then always ensuring that we're putting in the extended coverage. It's too cheap to not include. I believe Brittany had a situation where her buyer closed. I don't know. I believe it was unpaid liens ended up on the property. They called the title insurance company. The company paid off the actual lien and then pursued the seller to get the damages back. So it's worth having. Here we go. Section 9, survey. Anybody dealt with this survey? New ILC or new survey? When are ILCs
Yeah,
or surveys needed?
Land. I've done it on land.
Land, okay.
or large,
Mr. What was
large,
that, Bill?
large properties.
Large
Acreage.
properties. What's the difference between the ILC? What is an ILC and what's their survey?
ILC is improvement location.
Improvement location certificate. It's basically where the improvement, where's the house is located on the property,
Correct. House and road,
right?
driveway.
When do we want to advise somebody of getting an ILC or a survey?
You think somebody might be encroaching on your land?
I would say anytime that somebody, I think that you should advise them to get it on every contract. And it needs to be in
I don't
writing.
know if, I think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I say you do it to just CYA.
I mean, an ILC is only like $99 or something. So, I mean, doesn't
Well,
really-
townhouses and condos, I don't see where it's necessary there.
Not necessary.
I just
Okay.
feel like if it's a standard lot and block in a residential neighborhood, you probably don't need it, but if it's some wonky, weird, if it's evergreen or if it's something that's just not your typical lot and block in a typical subdivision, then you should do it.
Definitely advise.
But I don't
You
do
know,
it.
I-
I don't do it on every contract. I guess maybe I should.
Well, I
You
mean,
know,
You want to at
what's
least
that, Bill?
option.
Case in point, I had a property where I listed two properties that were side by side. They ended up being bought by the same person. And the previous owner on the last property that I sold, and the owner's mother lived in that one, he lived in the other one, but they had put up this big monstrous brick wall because he had a swimming pool and it was cattywampus. I mean, part of it started about 2 feet inside of his property line and ended up 2 feet on the other house's property line. So, you just don't ever know.
Right. Right.
But that was kind of the buyer's deal, and the agent that I worked with said, "Let's just not say anything about it." And I said, "Well, it's not my responsibility to say anything about it because you're representing both, the buyer." So I just kept my mouth shut. But that's an instance where it would have been a good idea to do something like that if you're representing the buyer.
I think this is one of those things that, it's better to advise up front than, to be liable in the rear. Literally.
That's well put.
I just made that up. I think that I always advise, I do deal with a lot of rural properties. But this is definitely something that I recommend for every rural property that I do is encourage them to get that survey completed. If they don't actually want to get the survey and it's their decision, it's fine by me, but I think it's just more of an advisory. Any thoughts, comments? Here's something that I do most cases is when I do include it in here, I do new survey in the form of, and I just put to be selected by buyer. I let the buyer decide what survey they want. And usually by the time we're writing these contracts, they haven't made the decision to where I make it open-ended for them. Any thoughts, Thomas?
No, like you said, leaving it open to the buyer, so to speak, as opposed to putting like meets and bounds or specifying the specific survey, because it does kind of tie them into whatever specific package that the surveyor is offering, if you will.
Right. So that's, right here, to be selected by buyer. Pretty straightforward. I think it's one of those CYAs, make sure that you at least advise it in writing. If you've advised in writing and that it ends up being an obstacle or an issue in the past, at least you suggested it.
What if, that chosen by buyer, could you put like if applicable or per their decision? Because if you kind of leave it open-ended like that, you don't do it, then they could come back and say, well, I needed some help from you to do that. I mean, I just trying to think about this stuff,
Well, but that goes back to an inspection. I think they would have to actually contact a surveyor themselves and ask what might be the best route and remedy for their need, so that's not really my advice either, so that's where you would contact the engineer and have that engineer help guide them.
Okay, fair enough.
And then clear with section 9.2, there's automatically a waiver, if you will. So if you get to the deadline, you don't do it, well, then it automatically waives.
I include it in most of mine when I have real property, and if my people don't elect to do it, then that's exactly it. Leaning on that waiver. If we miss those dates and deadlines, then it just surpasses.
What do you put do you write something in that box there on 9.1.2 that says if required by blah, blah, lender or whoever? Or do you just skip that?
What are you saying, 912?
Yeah, I mean, do you put any verbiage in this box here? That, I've seen that in offers before where people will put if required by lender or
if it's
title
paid for
or-
by buyer, sure. I mean, I think that's case by case. I mean, rarely is it required by the lender. I guess, does anybody have an example of why it would be required by the lender?
Would VA maybe require the seller to pay for it?
To be honest, I don't know. I've encountered it one time, but I don't even know why they wanted the ILC. So I'm not even sure as to why it was required.
Sometimes the underwriters do some crazy stuff, so that wouldn't surprise me a bit.
Right. Yeah, but to your point, Andrea, I mean, that's I think, where you could, it's basically saying who's paying for it. It could be both parties. Seller and buyer agree to split the cost. Here we go,
Yeah,
moving on.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. Number 10, property disclosures, inspections, indemnity, insurability, due diligence, and source of water. Seller property disclosures as a listing agent. Do we want to encourage our sellers to include a seller's property disclosure?
Yes, sir.
Do they have to?
No, but it looks like they're hiding something if they don't.
Yeah, might as well just do it.
Scratch
Yeah.
that. You say, no, it's not required. And this infuriates me when I see seller's agents saying that we haven't lived in the property, we haven't owned the property, so we're not providing a seller's property disclosure. If we read 10.1, seller agrees to deliver to buyer, period. It's in the contract. You're going to supply it. Do you know who supplies the water? Yes. Do you know who supplies the electricity? Yes. So you can fill out the seller's property disclosure. You do have information to add.
Right.
So
Yeah,
when people say no seller's property disclosure, that really gets my hackles up.
Well, and I think, who's liable with the seller with, I mean, are we part of the disclosure piece? Yes or no?
No.
They have to agree to it at the bottom of the contract. So if they have to add things, they have to have quote unquote filled it out. And that's where they check that buyer box at the bottom that locks in all of the information within the seller's property disclosure. Then they can sign.
There you go. I think seller property disclosure is a must. I've never had a listing that didn't. If I had a seller that didn't want to include one, I don't know if I'd actually select to work with them, but I've never had that. I've never encountered it. What's the piece about material facts?
Disclose, disclose, disclose.
What are
Amen.
material facts, Thomas?
Amen. Disclose, disclose, disclose. A material fact is anything that could be used in the decision calculus of the buyer.
That's pretty broad. What does that mean?
Exactly. The buyer decides what was a material fact.
Right. I think what do you got, Bill?
Well, it used to be, you couldn't tell anybody if there was a suicide in the property, and then it went to where you had to disclose that. And it's, and you get into like HIV and stuff like that. I need to look up on that stuff because some of that stuff could be perceived as a material fact to some people. I mean, it wouldn't bother me one way or another, but it's not me that's buying the property. So I need to kind of look at stuff like that because I'm not sure, because the laws just seem to change back and forth all the time with respect to those things.
Yeah, it's no
As
longer
far as a
required.
suicide or a death in the home, you do not disclose it now because I just took this class with Dora and they said no, because it puts a stigma on the property.
Stigmatized
Okay.
property.
So you don't have to now. You don't say, oh, someone hung themselves in the garage.
So what about HIV? How's that going? That used to be a big deal.
And I would
No, I don't think that's even an issue.
that's a HIPAA issue. Are you really going to say that a seller had a non-communicable or communicable disease? That's a HIPAA issue. I've just disclosed private medical information of a third party.
Really only have to disclose if there was a meth house there.
Correct.
Hey, Jared, I have a question. There's a house in my neighborhood that sold.
Okay.
And I know for a fact, because I know the neighbor, the DEA had gone to their home several times because they were growing marijuana in their basement.
Uh-huh.
Where obviously it was for resale, but and when they sold the home, nothing was mentioned about that. I thought it was a requirement.
Methamphetamine production, yes,
Hazardous.
because you're using
You
red
used to grow
phosphorus,
pot in
you're
my
using
basement. I didn't
toluene,
disclose it.
you're using all sorts of various solvents. So methamphetamine, absolutely. But marijuana, yeah, you could have a mold issue,
No.
but nothing like meth.
I think, to be honest, I think it could fall under the cultivating category of growing flowers. You know what I mean? Would we disclose that? I don't know. I don't know if that's an actual needed piece,
Unless you're growing poppies.
Well, processing poppies, maybe.
Yeah, you can grow poppies, you just can't.
You can't process them, huh?
Right. Calm down, Bill.
Ozarks.
Here's a piece, I guess, where it says buyer, it is in an as-is condition, where is and with all faults. I don't know if anybody's heard Thomas say this. Is the buyer agreeing to purchase the property as is, where is, and with all faults?
Yes.
Yep. So I like that when I always put that in my buyer contract, where I'm like, oh, buyer agrees to buy it as is. My buyer already agreed to that. Inspection is who has the right to inspect? I guess here's one. Even if you waive their objection in dates and deadlines, do they still obtain and have the right to inspect the property?
Yes.
Sure.
Well,
Sure.
you'd have inspection termination still on there. I mean, if you waive the objection and resolution.
Even if you remove the termination deadline, do they still have the right to inspect? Yes.
Yes.
Yep. So I like reminding my buyers that they do have that right to inspect no matter what. Even if we include this language, even we say that you're going to purchase it as is, you're already agreeing to purchase it as is.
I'd like to put in my counter proposals that seller is selling property as is, where is, and with all faults. Seller has no intention to do any additions, repairs, or improvements.
There
So
you
I
go.
use that as kind of like a communicating document. Don't nickel and dime me with the inspection objection.
You know, and I say this multiple times as well, kind of falling in line with Thomas. He puts it in his counter. I also say it verbally when I start to receive offers. I say that the sellers aren't in a physical or financial position to make any adjustments to the property. Does it always work? No. Do I end up getting the objection? Yes.
Yeah, isn't that
They-
funny?
they-
Get it no matter what.
Well, me, even when I say that I'm gonna, when I put it in there, buyer agrees to purchase the property as is with health and safety items considered, I still submit an objection every time for him.
Well, the seller can also pay at the closing with proceeds generated from the sale of the property too, if they choose to.
How does the inspection objection work? What happens? I guess there's two sections for the buyer to sign on the inspection objection. Why?
Second one is to waive the inspection objection.
To rescind their objection.
If they're not going to send a resolution over.
What happens if we object and our resolution deadline is midnight tonight and we don't have anything by 11:59? What do we need to do?
Hold the objection.
Or let the contract cancel?
Yeah.
Wait, say that again. What if we don't have what?
What the actual resolution piece? If the inspection objection is delivered and the resolution deadline is tonight by midnight, and we don't receive the resolution by 11:59, what do we need to do with the objection?
Oh,
We either have to rescind the objection or we have to let the contract cancel.
We can do either one of those.
Right. And here's the thing is it's our responsibility to remind our buyers that if we don't get this tonight, we have to do one of these two things. Does anybody want to work till midnight? No.
You got to do.
no, God, no.
I ensure that I have my resolutions before 5 o'clock. Hey, where's our resolution? Where's our resolution? Where's our resolution? I'd like it the day before. I'd like it 3 days before.
You know, the old resolution didn't have the ability for the buyer to rescind it. And the reason they do that now is because there was a time when you'd get 2 or 3 offers on a property. The first one might not be the most and the best. So they'd let that thing expire so they could revert to the second offer, which actually had more money to the seller. So that's why they brought that in there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I've done it before. Hey, we're not doing anything. We have every intention of moving forward with our other buyer if you guys want these items corrected.
There you go.
Right. As far as it goes for dates and deadlines, I ensure that my objection and my resolution dates and deadlines have at least two to 3 days between them.
I agree.
Yeah, 3's best.
This is the trickiest part of the contract, so you gotta give it space.
Here we go. Section 10.4, damage, liens, indemnity. Any thoughts, Thomas?
With regards to
This particular section?
I think it's pretty straightforward. So I don't know if anybody has any questions regarding it, but basically it's, you're buying it as is, where is, with all faults. But if there's other damages that have occurred, there's seller's responsibility, as well as seller is responsible for the payment of any liens, etc. Like my situation with the roofer, right? The roofer got screwed because the seller sold and then left the state. So, but the seller is still on the hook for those liens and the like. Another situation is where a builder or whatever, a contractor has finished up work, but hasn't actually billed yet, right? So this is what would cover for as far as the buyer has at least some kind of recourse against the seller to make sure that contractor's bill is paid.
And this is also saying that the buyer, let's say this, it's saying that the buyer won't incur any liens or damages to the actual property itself, and that it's it is the seller's property, but that the buyer won't actually do that. The buyer's not going to send out send out the inspector, and then the inspector put a lien on the property because the buyer didn't pay. Let's say they had agreement for the buyer to pay for a window to be replaced. The window gets replaced, but then the buyer doesn't pay and doesn't purchase the property. This is saying that the buyer also won't incur any damages or liens to the property. Insurability, property insurance deadline. Do they have who doesn't want to insure their property?
Cash buyers.
Cash buyers?
They don't have to. But if
Maybe.
you got financing, you have to.
Have
It's a
to,
requirement.
right?
Yeah.
Even if you have a cash buyer, I think that you have to remind your cash buyer that they need to get insurance on their property, that this portion is here for a reason. You have a property insurance termination deadline to ensure that you can insure the property. Is there cases where sometimes properties are uninsurable?
Yes, when I've had 2 claims against them.
Okay. I guess what would be some examples of maybe properties that might fall into this category recently?
Structural damage.
Structural damage, right? Flood zones, burn areas. Is there sometimes requirements by property insurance companies for properties?
Usually they do not inspect, but a property insurance company has the right to inspect beforehand. They generally don't, but they do have the opportunity to inspect before they write the policy.
I've had property insurance companies require that the property be mitigated for fire. That's something that's then negotiated between who pays it. Obviously, my buyers paid it because they wanted the property. I think insurability is a big piece that we have to remind our cash buyers because with the financing piece, like Thomas said, it's required. Keeping that
Also,
property.
if you get into a sticky situation with a inspection objection and inspection resolution where there's something significant that needs to be fixed, be it something structural, so to speak, you want to make sure that when you amend your inspection resolution date and you push that back, you want to make sure that your property insurance deadline is after the new inspection resolution. So in case they agree to have some kind of structural thing fixed, et cetera, that when you reach out to your insurance company, that you explain to them what has been fixed and that they will continue to insure the property.
There you go. Due diligence. Thomas, do you have any verbiage that you use in this section?
Oh, I generally am going to include anything that I think that might come up with regards to liens or any work that has been recently been done. I may demand for, paid invoices, marked paid in full. So if, they did work on it beforehand, as far as like painting, or they did an addition or something like that, that was very recent. If I see a permit, I may demand a, copy of a paid in full invoice.
There's some blanket statements, all invoices, I put any documentation that pertains to the property, any associated documents that pertain to the property, even if it's an owner's manual for the hot water heater. I don't care. Whatever you've got that pertains to the property, I'd like you to share it with my buyers.
The title company also has documentation at the closing that says all liens or any work that's been done has been paid for. People sign off on that. And so there's documentation to kind of hold everybody's feet to the fire, so to speak, with respect to that as well.
Well, this goes back to section 8112, or 8113 is the actual OEC coverage. Ensuring that you have that extended coverage, I think is another portion of protecting your buyer.
Yep.
I guess anything to add to due diligence, anybody? Is there any element of objections, review and objection? I've never had it happen. I've never had a buyer object. I've never had a buyer terminate. I think this is one of those pieces that you want to give and get as much documentation as possible. When I do my listing appointments and I start getting ready for the listing, I encourage my people to put that all together and actually have it available at the time of the inspection. Leave it at the house, let them review and go through it at the property. And then I ensure that they leave it at the property during the inspection as well and do not take it with them. Trying to get that back sometimes doesn't happen.
I never do due diligence deadlines.
As
I
far as
just,
for your buyers?
yeah, I mean, because especially in this competitive market, it just adds another, it's just, I don't know, this is just me, but I just
Well-
think it's a pain in the ass. And I've said this before, pretty much every seller I've ever worked with always provides the documentation in a timely manner because I make sure they do it.
So
And when
so
you're
here's a-
when you need to be competitive, the simpler and cleaner the offer, the better.
well, I think that we also have to look at this in a liability sense. What if I don't include those due diligence deadlines or documents, or at least inform my buyers that we can and should? I mean, is it
I'm
something that
just
we should
saying,
always?
I mean, usually just junk paper that they stuck in the back of the drawer. Not everybody is organized and has all that stuff available. I don't know. I'm just, whatever. Everybody has to do their own thing, but I personally don't do due diligence.
And I would
I mean, I do due diligence, but I don't do it. I don't document it on the contract.
I would defer to your client making the decision. These aren't our decisions to be made. I think what it is for us to inform them what these elements are. And if they want to keep it clean and they want to omit it, I would definitely omit it at that point. I could recommend that they don't include it, but I think that we have to remember that these aren't our agreements, that these are fueled and guided by the actual consumer themselves. So I would encourage it if your buyer wants it. And I would then not include it if they're okay with not including it.
Okay.
10.7, conditional upon sale of the property. Conditional sale a conditional sale. When is this included? What's also part of it? Anybody use one recently?
I did. I got it accepted. It was a miracle.
So on the buy side, Andrea, you had somebody selling a property that was conditional on that particular property selling, right?
Wait, you mean my
Your buyer.
listing client?
Well, your buyer
Yeah,
had
my buyer has a house under contract, so it's a condition of buying their next home.
and that's where we would want to put that property address of such, whether it's in
Right.
this state or another. And then it's also
Mhm.
associated to the conditional sale deadline. Anybody have general practice? We kind of talked about it in our dates and deadlines conversation the other day. I think that conditional sale deadline, I think, is partially dictated by the sale of that property. If that property is already under contract and set to sell next week, that deadline could be tight and quick. Most of the time, if I have a conditional sale, I put that deadline on closing date as well, just to ensure that they're either at the same time or definitely, obviously completed before the closing of this contract.
Yeah, I did closing date. But, it's still scary. I mean, you're still on pins and needles when you have all these dominoes,
Well,
all
You know,
these
I've-
plates spinning. I don't like plates spinning in the air.
that's why we get paid the big bucks.
I know, right? Yeah, right. You give
Or you
away
could
half
be-
my commission to buy appliances and shit.
You could be the seventh one of 8 people down the line. You know what I'm saying?
I've been in a conditional setup before.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not fun.
that's a nightmare. God, talk
Yeah.
about dominoes.
Of course it is.
If this was a reverse market, if this was an actual buyer's market, it would be more prevalent. It would be happening. I think that it's just not the case. If we've got a conditional offer on the table, it's the least attractive offer probably.
Just had one in December, Jared. It's
Where was-
3 conditionals.
Awful. No fun at all. A source of water. Pretty straightforward here. Buyer does or does not acknowledge receipt of the seller property disclosure, source of water addendum, and is there a well on the property? Yes or no? Who provides the source of water? Do we have to actually include the actual source of water disclosure?
Yes.
It's on the seller's property disclosure now.
Yep. So as long as it's in the seller's property disclosure, the source of water, we don't have to complete that form separately.
I have a question. I'm gonna be selling a property in Evergreen that's on a well, and I cannot find the well permit number anywhere. Gonna be an issue.
I mean, it has to be transferred. It'll have to be found. Your sellers don't have that themselves.
No, it's my sister. She doesn't. I've researched it. I can't find it. So can I just ask how? I don't know why I can't find it. It's usually, it's weird. I've never
And you're
had this
searching-
problem before.
You're searching the state site.
Yeah, I'm sure it's searching the state and county,
Hmm.
and
Did you
it's just
call
not there. I don't,
Did you
How
call?
old's the property?
how old? Well,
Yeah,
the house was built in 1918 or something, 1905.
so it's been around maybe for that long, huh?
I'm sure.
That could be an issue.
And I don't know if it's a shared well. That's the other thing too. When you go to the map, you see all these wells, in this certain area. And I can't pinpoint which one is hers and if it's shared with someone else. It's just weird. So my question is, I know there's a place on the contract that says well permit number. So if I don't have that, if that's okay, isn't it?
I mean, you'd have to put something in there, even if it's unknown. You'd have to put something. I mean,
Okay.
if it's going to be transferred at the time of closing, it'll have to be determined at some point.
Yeah.
To be honest, I would challenge your sister to do her part and find her well. Have
Could've
her
been-
contact. Have
Was
her
that
contact
probably
him.
Windham County then, probably?
Well, I think that I would require her to call the state and actually identify that.
There
Yeah.
was.
Okay. That's easier said than done. You don't know my sister, Jared.
I'll work with her.
She's gonna say, that's my realtor's job.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Nope. I sell your property. I don't chase your well permit.
The good Lord gave us the ability to choose friends because we can't choose our relatives.
That's
Yeah.
right.
I'm gonna leave that alone, Bill. I guess lead-based paint disclosure. When's it required? What's changed
Thank
recently
God
about
they changed
That-
that. Thank God they changed that. That was such a hassle before.
such a hassle? What a better system now. What do we advise our clients in regard to the lead-based paint disclosure? How's it set up? How does it work? What's the big picture elements involved in the lead-based paint disclosure?
Actual knowledge.
Actual knowledge. Thank you, Thomas. That was super easy. All they're asking is, do you actually have knowledge of lead-based paint in the house? Your house is older than 78. We only want to know if you actually know if there is. Should I get it tested? I don't know. You decide. Do you want to get it tested? If you know that it is, then you have to disclose that it is.
A little something about that. They quit putting lead in paint in 1957, but because it had a 20-year shelf life, you actually could have had a 20-year can of paint and applied it in 1977 and it would have worked. But the chances of that are,
Right.
a lot.
I think that this is one of those elements where I just remind my buyer or my seller, this is only requesting you to acknowledge whether you actually have knowledge of lead-based paint on the property. And when we give it to my buyer, hey, well, do they have lead-based paint? I'm concerned. Well, I mean, it's safe to assume maybe that it does. Do you want to get it tested? No, I don't want to get it tested. Great, check the box.
Chances are your sister's house has lead-based paint, Andrea.
Well, yeah, but I'm sure we don't care. I
Under-
always tell people, if you have little babies,
It's under 5 coats with acrylic.
it's
There
right.
you go. There you go.
And peel them all off.
Actually, those pencils you bought from China probably have them on them too.
Oh. Carbon monoxide alarms. Are they required?
Yes.
Yeah.
On FHA properties, yes, I think.
No,
Period.
State law,
Period. State law.
15 feet from a habitable bedroom.
Say that again, Thomas. How close?
15 feet.
15 feet within any habitable bedroom. Is that something we should include in our objection if found on the actual inspection report?
Yes,
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Is it something that would be easily added to the actual resolution? Sometimes it's the only thing that I put on my resolutions for my sellers.
$50 later.
They're cheap. They're nothing.
Yeah.
Here's the methamphetamine disclosure. If somebody's cooking meth, just disclose it. If it blew up because meth, disclose it. If you cleaned it up, the meth, disclose it.
lots of toxic chemicals used in making meth.
How do you know that, Thomas?
When I used to do asbestos litigation, we had a plaintiff who was saying he got from his working with asbestos, that's what gave him lung cancer. Well, his son was cooking meth in the basement. And a lot of those toxic chemicals associated with production of meth include like toluene, xylene, red phosphorus, and a few other toxic chemicals that basically, put solvents into your air conditioning system and onto the walls, etc. So the guy actually died before I cross-examined, but I was going to basically ask him about whether or not he saw certain materials in his basement.
There you go. Nasty stuff.
So that's how I know.
Tenant estoppel statement intentionally deleted. Thomas, what can you share on this piece?
I'm sorry, with tenant estoppel?
Correct.
That's, well, it's clearly intentionally deleted, but essentially it's about tenancies, right? So estoppel is that, they basically can stop the transaction. So, in this case, it's, but tenant has right of first refusal or the assumption of a lease, etc. The assumption of the lease is actually included in the due diligence documents section. So if you have a tenant in there, you're going to go up and, assign the lease, if you will. And then
There you
you're
go.
going to have to follow, as far as buyer, you're going to have to follow the terms of that lease. So, and it should have an, quote unquote, escape clause as far as terminating the lease with adequate notice. So, but that's basically, the tenant being able to stop the transaction.
Intentionally
I'm
deleted.
gonna be calling you. Oh, sorry.
Nope, you're good.
I'm gonna have a buyer with this situation soon, I think, and I might be calling Thomas to find out what I put in there for the tenant who's currently living there. I don't know. I've never done that before.
Okay, you want to demand in those due diligence documents, you want to demand that lease, the operative lease.
Okay.
And then so I can look at the lease and see what the outs are, so to speak.
Is there anything I need to be aware of if it's a Section 8? They
Yeah,
get 60 days, right?
yeah. And then there's also, I'd have to research it, but I'm sure that there are discrimination issues as well. So
Okay.
there's a little bit of a tightrope to be walked there. So you need to see the actual quote unquote contract, if you will, which is
Okay.
the lease.
What's your hourly fees, Thomas? Just kidding.
Usually it's 250 to 300, depending upon the task, if you will. But I don't charge for education. So, I don't think that's right. So as far as, all the upfront work I got to do to research and figure out an issue and whatnot, I don't charge for that. And generally, my rates are good, so to speak. Meaning as far as the actual billing, I only bill for actual work, right? Writing letters, making the phone calls where I'm actually doing something.
I encourage him to charge more is what I usually do.
Yeah.
I send him clients and I'm like, just run with this guy. I'm like, run with him. Just do what he says. Just charge this guy and he won't do it. We're going to help you. Here we go. Closing provisions. Section 12.1, closing documents, instructions, and closing. This is all super straightforward. Closing instructions are not executed with the contract. They're usually not executed till later. What's included in closing instructions is only who's facilitating the closing, what the actual cost for the actual closing is, and the individual who's doing it. Here's one that I think there's a lot of misconception or a lot of different ideas. Closing, the actual closing date, or by mutual agreement, the hour and place of closing will be designated by. What are some of the general practice? What do you guys put in here?
Agreement of buyer and seller.
Mutually agreed upon.
Correct.
You know what? Don't you remember we had that class a while ago back at Colorado Home Finder, and whoever was teaching it said that the actual escrow officer is the one who decides, and it should be the title officer in there.
But it's not though. It's actually, you know, the
I know,
individual
well, I
parties.
thought that was weird. I'm just saying that's what they said. So I don't know. I used to put by all
That's what they'd
parties to the
like.
contract.
Well, so
Huh?
here's
That's what
my
they'd like.
thoughts. If I've got an out-of-state buyer, out-of-state seller, can I not facilitate a closing at their house, even if they're in-state? Can I not facilitate a closing at their house at 8 p.m. at night? Yes.
Absolutely.
And who decides that? They do. It has nothing to do with the title company. It has nothing to do with the rep. It has nothing to do with me. It's usually the individual
Well, yeah,
parties who
but
dictate.
yes, it does. The title company sends a notary out.
But they don't actually decide. They didn't decide it.
What do you normally put, Jared? Because I usually put listing broker.
No,
I just put-
no listing. Don't give up any power to the other. No.
Yeah,
I put individual parties. I just put individual parties is what I put. The buyer or the seller gets to pick.
Yeah,
They
why-
pick when they want to do it, and my buyer will pick when they want to do it. You could put buyer and seller. Designated by buyer and seller is probably the best thing we could put in there. Thomas, what do you put?
Mutually agreed upon by buyer and seller.
There you go. You know, it doesn't even have to be mutually agreed upon. My seller could close 2 days before, a day before, you know? I mean, it's really, we have a lot of flexibility, you know, these days with closings, with remote closings.
You know,
Um,
in Nevada, Arizona, the buyer and seller never do really meet at the closing. They're done separately.
I love it when I get a request from the other party, you know, my other party's transaction coordinator. Hey, Jared, I wanted to set up your closing. Hey, stay out of my business. I'll set up my closing.
Yeah.
Kills me. Disclosure of settlement costs, super straightforward. 13, transfer of title. If none of these are selected, what does it defer to?
general warranty.
Oh, warranty deed.
Thoughts?
General warranty deed,
I'm gonna say special.
Special.
special,
Special is limited to the existing owner.
what they know.
General goes all the way back in time.
What's the greatest amount of coverage for your buyer?
General.
There you go.
Want to get
If
it.
you've got a buyer, general warranty deed is the way to go. Is there a cost difference between them?
I don't think so.
So why would we not? Why would we not?
As far as literally on the document itself, the difference is the word general for special. And then when you look into the warranties, I think the special removes 4 words or 5 words.
There
Five,
you go.
and then special is just what they know, and what they're willing to say is they don't know anything about the property and they're transferring it to you with good faith.
I thought I thought special was that it was just, didn't go back to the original. I thought it was just that general goes all the way back and special is just that owner.
You're
That
correct.
owner, right.
Oh, okay.
Any comments, questions about 13? Super straightforward. Here's something I guess, I don't know. I think, quick claim deeds, I use these quite frequently, and it's usually only in the case of adding another party to the contract. I mean, not to the contract, but to the actual title at closing. Let's say we have one individual who's financing it. If you're not financing, you're not on the financing. Are you on this contract? Yes or no?
You can be.
Well, no. If you're not on the financing documents and you're not in the financing piece, you can't be on the contract.
Not on that, but the quit claim could be rendered after the fact. That's what I thought we were talking about.
There you go. That's exactly it, Bill. Yep. So that's some of the most frequent cases that I use these is when somebody's financing. Let's say it's the wife is using her financing. She's the one that signs all the contracts and documents throughout the whole process. At the time of closing, we quit claim the actual other individual, the husband, let's say in this situation, onto the actual title itself. I think it's $25 and we can do it right after we close.
Yep.
I think that that's something that I remind my people. Who was it? We were out helping a boyfriend, girlfriend kind of combo. They've been together forever. He's on the financing. She's a little concerned that she's not going to be on the actual deed. He's a real estate agent in Arizona and either omitted to tell her that he could quit claim her onto it or didn't know that he could. And me bringing it up was kind of a little sensitive subject because I don't think he wanted her to be on it. But
So Jared, do you click on quit claim deed in that situation then?
nope. That's just something that we would
Yeah.
just communicate with the actual, closing
Yeah.
representative.
Yes.
You would select the quit claim if the seller was trying to put the buyer onto the title, right?
No, this has nothing to do with the contract. The scenario we're discussing has nothing to do with our actual contract.
Correct, but why is that option there and when would you select it?
Well, maybe it's a situation where the husband's quit claiming to the wife and we're using the contract. What if it's a mom to a son? What if it's, it could be any scenario where it's just the quit claim process.
Correct.
I would say,
Or if it's a cash deal too, where one person's paying the cash and then they say, hey, I want this person to be on there too. So you quit claim it to the other person,
But
right?
you would still have a transfer of title though. with that. I feel like it's more when the seller's transferring it to someone they know, to the buyer, and they don't want to go through general warranty, special warranty, and they're just quit claiming them onto the title.
well, and in some cases, it's just not necessary. So I had somebody who has a piece of land that two owners just want to transfer title. The one just wants to give them $10,000 and the other one, so give me $10,000 and I'll give you the property. Well, the agent asked me how they should set it up. I said, well, to be honest, they could just give $10,000 and quit claim them off the title. But I guess if you want to make money, you better do your job and do the whole process. So I think there could be an infinite number of ways that it would be utilized, but I think it's rare. Personal representative deeds, bargain and sale deeds, typically rare. I guess, Thomas, could you give us any examples, I guess, for bargain and sale or a personal representative deed?
As far as a bargain and sale deed, it essentially does not include the warranties, right? So basically it is a straight up transfer, but you have no warranties associated with the title itself.
As is, so to speak.
So it's buyer beware as
Well,
far as bargain and sale deed.
So as a buyer's representative, let's say the listing agent is actually requiring this, that it be a bargain and sale deed. How can we still protect our buyer, and what should we advise our buyer in this situation?
I'm saying special warranty, minimum.
I'm going to say you select title company and then we select special or general warranty.
Mhm.
If you select the title company and you cover the cost of the title commitment, select whatever you want. If the seller's requiring that it be a bargain and sale deed, we're not playing that game. Let's select title ourselves and let's let you end up with that warranty, would be my advice.
I can second that motion. Now, as far as a quit claim deed, right, that comes with nothing, so to speak. It literally means quit and claim. So the grantor is quitting their claim of ownership. That's it. There's no warranties, nothing. So if they don't actually even own the property, they never had a claim to it. So it's, illusory at that point. And then personal representatives, that falls into the estates, right? Where they basically inherited it. It's out of an estate. They know nothing about the property, and they can use the, personal representatives, because that's basically what they're doing. They're either the executor or they might be a guardian, so to speak, like a guardian ad litem.
That comes with a power of attorney too, does it not?
Yes.
Payments and liens and encumbrances, section 14. Pretty super straightforward. Seller's responsible for many of the proceeds of the sale to cover any of those, any liens or encumbrances on the property at the time of closing.
I want to go back real quick and ask about a treasury deed. And what kind of guarantees does that come with, if any at all? 'Cause I'm-
I'm not familiar with the treasury deed.
My understanding is if you go and pay somebody's property taxes for 3 years, you can apply for a treasury deed and actually own the property, which overtakes any types of banks or financial situations, and even the present occupant and or owner.
Okay, now I do have actually a client that I'm working with that has outstanding property tax liens. It's in Adams County. And essentially what it is that they sold the lien to a company. The company's collecting, I believe, 12% or 18% on the.
Yep.
And basically what happens is that it goes for 3 years, right? So you don't pay your property taxes for 3 years. And then the owner of the liens, right? If you're going to buy the first lien, you're going to basically buy the second one and buy the third one. And at the end of that 3 years, then yes, there is a lien release, so to speak, that's filed by the lien holder. And then 10 days after that, the county assessor will sign over the property to the lien holder who has requested. It completely bypasses all of the foreclosure process. So once it gets to that point, you are basically SOL, you have no recourse.
You don't have the 10 days in that time span to make good on those taxes from the person who paid for it plus the interest?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
You are correct. You are redeeming it because you are applying for a treasurer's deed.
Wonderful.
So good point. I actually have a client right now, but I completely escaped beyond that.
I've heard that stuff happens, but I've never known of it to really actually be in
Not
place.
nowadays. Not nowadays. When you're back, and you'll see if you've ever been to some of these tax liens. Essentially, usually, you have J.P. Morgan Chase as owning the first mortgage. So when these property tax liens come up, you'll usually have J.P. Morgan there to bid for that lien because they don't want anybody else stepping in front of them. So as far as like securing the property, if you will.
But they'll let 2 years go and not say a thing about it, huh?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Here we go. We're learning something new. Let's go jump to section 15, closing costs, fees, association fees, and taxes. 15.2, closing service fee. I think this is sometimes a misconception. The fee for real estate closing services must be paid at closing by who? And what does this actually include? What is the actual closing service fee?
$360 for the Scrivener.
It's for Chicago title, it's $370. I've had buyers sometimes believe that this is their closing costs, their lender closing costs.
Well, they all do. They're like, what?
Oh, I thought you said
You
we were
have to
splitting the
explain.
closing costs. No, this is an
Yeah,
actual
they
closing
always
service
do that.
fee.
The service is the.
I always split it because it's fair to split between both parties.
And I think that in our competitive situation, I encourage my buyers just to cover it. This is a $370 fee that makes your offer look more attractive. Any questions about the closing service fee? Pretty straightforward. Status letter and record change fee. What's this associated to?
CIC.
HOAs.
HOAs,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Interest communities. I think this is once again, who do you want to pay? Buyer can pay, seller can pay, one half. Is it something that we typically know in advance? When we're writing for our buyers, do we usually know what the cost of these are?
If you
No.
research it, if you go to the HOA website, you might find out or make the phone call.
Not happening.
Well, I said might.
Mario, how much was your status letter and your record change fee for your listing?
Dude, it was actually really high, and I was only able to find it because they had bought it in May, so I was able to previously pull up their settlement sheet and find it. It was like $200 something for the letter, and then $200 something for the record. It was like
Wow.
$440 altogether, I think.
You know, and when I'm asked, I usually say it's under $1,000. It could be $100. It could be $1,000. It's usually under $1,000.
Yeah, with the transfer fees, it should be, if you add that in there, it was around 900 altogether for it when I was looking at it. So
There you go.
with all four of those together.
Sadly, I want to say $200 for each is fairly typical.
Mhm.
Right. Local transfer tax. Anybody encounter any local transfer tax?
No,
Me neither. I always click none. What happens if a local transfer tax was to pop up and this was checked none? What would happen?
I think the buyer would have to pay. Well, I don't know.
It's negotiated at that point.
Correct. It's
Right.
open season, but it should be paid by the seller.
There used to be a municipality in the Denver metro area that had one of those, and they've since got rid of it. And I'm thinking it was down
Green
around
Valley
Cherry-
Ranch.
Yes.
Green Valley?
Denver City, Green Valley Ranch.
Huh.
I think that's a private transfer fee, right? At Green
Oh,
Valley
yeah.
Ranch, it's like 0.05%.
Yeah, I do.
Don't you always just make whoever you're not representing pay for everything? That's what I do.
I like your thinking, unless I'm on the other end of the deal.
Well, I mean, and even if you did, and I was on the listing side, I'd just counter you anyway. So,
Mhm.
So
Um, uh,
Jared, have you ever ran into that? I mean, have you sold or bought in Green Valley Ranch? Because all of Green Valley Ranch does have a HOA transfer fee. It's not cheap. It's 0.05% of what the home
of
is.
the purchase price.
Yeah.
It's a big fee.
It's like 15.
How long's that been in existence? Do you know?
Oh, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I do know, like, if a home was previously income restricted, because there are homes that used to be and then now they're not. I had a client like that, and the private transfer fee is actually really low. So I don't know how it works, but then I've sold there or bought for clients actual homes that were not income restricted, and it's always 0.05%.
Yeah,
There
I've
you go.
done some Richmond and another builder out there a couple of 3 or 4 or 5 times, but that was like 20 years ago, and I don't recall that being in place then. But maybe things changed. Obviously, they did.
Right. Yep. One of those scenarios that you just don't know till it happens.
Another reason not to live by the airport.
Yeah.
Just one more reason, huh? Here we go. I guess private transfer fee, we can place it wherever we want. Water transfer fee, exact same kind of scenario. Who do we want to pay it? What's included and what's the cost? This is to not exceed. I usually leave it blank. I don't put any specific to not exceed. If it's my buyer, I usually have my buyer in a competitive situation. If it's not competitive, I'll usually have the seller. Anybody encounter sales and use tax? I've never. To my understanding, it's more in regard to maybe sometimes in commercial real estate. I usually just check none. One of those things that if it pops up and it was to show up, it would be negotiated at that point. FERPTA. Does anybody know what FERPTA is?
Foreign or
It's a special type of sugar.
It's a seller's tax for being basically a foreign
A foreign-
person,
Investment.
right?
Yeah.
Is when a seller sells, do they sign this document at the time of selling that they are not a foreign individual?
I
Yes,
do believe they do.
right. I had a wonderful little scenario where my client had a perceivably foreign name, and I kept getting offers from this one buyer that kept checking this box that the seller is. I was like, will you stop checking that box? My seller is not a foreign person.
I check it every time, always have, and I use it as one is the guy or the guy.
Looking at the contract.
other agent actually reading this contract? And did they see it says is? And then also at the end, if they are a foreign national and they sign whatever documents, et cetera, to slide through, at least with that is, I do have a colorful argument against the title company because the government will make the buyer pay. So at least I would have a colorful argument as the title company being the man in the middle and a breach of fiduciary duty.
There you go. That's what you get when you work with an attorney.
Are you gonna start checking it, Jared?
Nope. I guess, that's one of those things. I like Thomas's approach though. I mean, it does ensure that somebody's viewing it and it does ensure that it's being covered. It is a protection, for the actual buyer. What happens if who has to pay that tax if it's not paid by the seller?
Buyer.
There you go.
Well, the title company interacts with some sort of paperwork to identify that, correct?
Yes.
Or is it out of state, or maybe both? Okay.
Well, the title company has documents that they have to sign as far as for, W-2 purposes, 1099-S purposes. And so, yeah, there are documents that are signed to ensure or assure that they're a, United States taxpayer. But fraud happens.
Sure does.
Fraud happens. I'm gonna get a shirt that says that. Caller with holding. What's this in regard to?
You're leaving the state. This is the don't let the door hit you on the ass tax.
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Give us a
basically,
better-
that withholding is just to ensure that the next year you're going to file a Colorado income tax form.
There you go. They want to make sure they get their taxes out of it.
Correct. And even if Colorado has to give it back to you, no big deal. They just want to make sure that you're filing that last year's income tax form, the 1040, or I'm sorry, 104.
What's the amount of withholding that they withhold?
I think 2%.
Okay.
There you go. 16 prorations and association assessments. Any thoughts on 16.1, the taxes portion? What do you think? What do you do, Thomas?
Yeah, most recent mill is the easiest, right? Because you know what it was, last time, and so it's all laid out for you.
There you go. That's what I check every time. Most recent mill.
I always check that too. And then I took a class that was facilitated by a real estate attorney, and he said taxes for the calendar year immediately preceding. He always checks that box. I'm like, oh, that's weird.
It's
Because I always used to do most recent.
It's somewhat of the same one, half dozen, six of another, because the taxes for the calendar year immediately preceding are based upon the most recent mill levy and most recent assessed valuation, which is the previous year. So your tax statement is
Okay,
going to
so
be
it
the
doesn't
most
really
recent
matter.
assessed valuation.
Most recent mill levy, most recent assessed valuation. That's what I check.
You're going to take that from your property tax bill, right? Your
Right.
last property tax bill is going to announce all of the mill levies and most recent valuation. And because Colorado is paying taxes in arrears, well, the taxes for a calendar year preceding are going to match the bill, which is so it's kind of half dozen of the other because Colorado pays in arrears.
16.2 rents. When does this come to play and how does it look? And what's the difference between these two options?
Rents actually received is cash accounting basis and accrued is, accounting purposes.
Can you give us an example?
Foreseeable future money that has not been yet received but is owed.
Yes,
There you
correct.
go. Okay. When is this something that might apply?
Commercial, but obviously we're in a residential contract, so
You can
There's
have
a tenant in the property?
Yes, or a tenant has left and has not paid, but then that's the seller's issue anyway. It doesn't really affect the buyer.
I guess pretty straightforward. Any questions about this portion?
Does it, so, so does it matter which we check? I mean,
Should be rents actually received.
okay.
You know,
For
let's say
res-
you close, let's say you close on the 15th and they paid rent. The tenant's still in the property. The tenant has one more year in their lease. You close on the 15th. Actual amounts received. If they've received the full month's payment, you would want to receive that half of the month's payment that they're still
Oh,
in there.
okay. I got you. Okay.
Because who is going to let you stay for 3 months and pay quarterly? That
Right.
would be the accrued system.
Well, and then that'd be a situation, let's say the tenant paid up front. They paid 1 year lease up front.
That's rents actually received,
There you go.
as opposed to in arrears, which would be accrued. You stayed there January, February, March, and then on April 1st, you pay for January, February, March. That's the accrued.
We kind of got that going on now, don't we, with respect that you cannot evict a tenant of your property. So maybe they go 2 or 3 months because of what the laws are saying right now and haven't paid. So that's a whole different ballgame.
That's a whole different ballgame because that's rents actually not received, breach of contract. Tenant, landlord files against tenant for the breach of contract and all of the monies that they owe. But generally, a lease is set up such that you're paying within the first 5 days of the month you're going to stay in. You don't let anybody get into an accrued situation.
Okay.
Association assessments. What does this include? What does it mean? And who should pay?
Kind
Anybody?
of spells it out there.
Well, I mean, literally, this whole thing spells everything out.
I mean-
Special assessments. What are special assessments?
Well, like for instance, you're in a townhouse and they decide they're going to put siding on it and they decide this month, but they're not going to start charging you for it for 3 months from today, but you end up closing next month. So it's been assessed, but you haven't paid for it, but it's in the process. It's going to mean that your monthly association fee is going to go up relative to the work that's going to be done.
Well, and sometimes these assessments could be a lump sum too. That they're requiring every resident to pay 2,000. They're paying, everybody's got to pay 300. What is
Yeah.
this act? If we check, let's say that for instance, I always check seller. Seller always pays, but it's for what portion? What assessments are they? There are any special
I have this
assessments?
happen. Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry,
the
go
amount
ahead.
the assessment is.
They're prior to closing. There are any assessments that have actually been applied prior to the closing date? If it's a future assessment, it doesn't have anything to do with this. If
No,
they
but
said-
but if they say you're going to.
If I have this happen where,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
what was that, Bill?
I was gonna say, if they assess it, say, hey, we're gonna start doing it, but we're not going to do it until we collect the money. And we're gonna start adding to your monthly association fee because we're gonna need to pull in so much money in order to get the work done. The work will actually start in 6 months, but we're not gonna actually have the money to do it. But you're gonna need to pay, say, $3,000. So it's already been assessed. It just hasn't been collected. So I would think that the seller is responsible for putting that $3,000 in place right there at the closing.
Well, and to my understanding, it's what has been assessed. So let's say that the payment increases. Well, that's fine. You would just pay what that payment is due. Any future payments then become the buyer. This is more in a case where, let's say there's a $10,000 assessment already placed on the property, and the seller themselves have agreed to pay off that over an extended time. That being already assessed and in place prior to closing, they would be required to pay that.
To pay the 10,000.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Any thoughts, Thomas?
Correct. So basically, because you do have people who there is a $10,000 special assessment, and they're like, I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm not paying that 10 grand. Well, clearly you are, because at some point money's going to cross the table as far as in that transaction. But yeah, so you're buying it also as far as a buyer, buying it as is, where is, and with all faults. But if the HOA is already going to be redoing all the siding or going to be doing the roof, then, seller would still, have the value, so to speak, of those improvements. They just haven't been completed yet. So,
There you go.
yeah, it's, and it's
Yeah.
assessed. So if it was $10,000 and they're going to pay $120 a month for the next 6 years, well, it's already been assessed. They already know what they're going to pay. Well, you're going to include that as far as the seller's responsibility because they've already started paying it. So you're going to pay for it in full.
There you go.
Earlier contracts didn't have that, and that's why they have that now because people got burned.
Yes.
Other prorations, water, sewer charges, propane, interest on continuing loan, and anything else that you might know that's associated with the property that you would want to include in prorations. Any examples? Most of them are right here.
Yeah, propane is the one that really is, if somebody has a 200-gallon or a 500-gallon propane tank, proration, they just filled it and they've spent $1,000 on propane. Well, they're going to walk away, leaving $1,000 worth of propane in there. So you can prorate that propane as far as the buyer is going to pay $900 for the remaining propane.
There you go.
What about solar leases? Would that be something you put in there?
Well, but
That's
that
a
would be a
whole-
prorated
that's a
amount.
whole nother animal.
Yeah, that's a different.
Solar
that's a-
release has to be approved by the lender because it's part of the purchase. The buyer's lender has to know about a solar lease and has to be included in their financing.
Right.
And the buyer has to assume the lease for the solar panel.
Right. Those are kind of a pain in the ass, man.
That was on my listing this weekend.
Mhm.
$40,000 is still owed, $181 a month till 2039.
They don't. Have, there's no electrical payment. And they
Oh
get
yeah, there is. It was only $9, but it's still a payment.
leases. There.
That's not is that a lease or is that a buyout?
It's a financing terms.
Financed it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They get credited with extra solar that they're probably just not producing a lot right now. It's probably why they have an electrical bill. If you produce enough, you don't have an electrical bill.
I didn't dive enough into it. Number 17, I guess 16.5, final settlement unless otherwise agreed in writing. These prorations are final. 17, possession. Does anybody put a standard amount in this price per day, cost per day? What does it mean? How about that? Any examples?
I usually put $200 to $250 because there's going to be storage costs and hotel costs and potentially food costs.
I had a seller, and I told her, I said, hey, let me get you at least a week to move out. No, I don't need a week. I just give me 3 days. I don't know. Let me get you a week. No, I only need 3 days. So she got her 3 days, and then she got a snowstorm up in Evergreen and couldn't move out. And the buyers went and blocked her into the driveway and made her pay that $250. I think I said it last time, per day that she was in there. And then she said it was my fault.
Well, they couldn't block her in. That wasn't right either.
I was in Costa Rica at the time. She's like, Jared, come save me. I was like, what am I going to do? Punch him?
Hey,
Proration. If you don't vacate the property, this is the amount of money that your seller will owe for each day that they don't vacate the property.
I put $250 in there.
I put $250. The contract that we accepted with the investor on my listing this weekend put $500 in there.
Wow.
I even told my seller, I said, hey, and he's got 6 tenants in that property right now. I said, can you guarantee that they'll all be out? If you don't, you're paying $500 a day to get them out. Second part, buyer. What does this checkbox mean? Buyer represents the buyer will occupy the property. Or does not represent that the buyer will occupy the property.
they're gonna rent it. It's an investment.
Primary residence.
Actually live there.
There you go. Janelle said it, primary residence is their principal residence. When do we check this box?
We're doing a post-occupancy agreement.
There you go. Buyer and seller agreed to execute a post-occupancy agreement. If possession is not on the same day of closing, should there be a post-occupancy agreement?
Yeah.
Maybe,
Always.
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 Even if it's one day, you always want one. It only takes one day to burn the house down. Only takes one day to get a lawsuit for injury. I say always, if possession is not at the time of closing, then you always want to have that post-occupancy agreement.
I second that motion.
Love it. Days, computation of periods of days and deadlines. Anybody have a general practice for 18.2? What does this mean? Will or will not?
Will not. A
Will
date's
not.
a date. A date's a date. Don't make me calculate. Don't make me
Ah.
forget. I forgot that,
You're a poet and you don't know it.
I forgot that President's Day is a holiday.
Right.
Right there. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a will not. My dates and deadlines are firm. They are what they are. We stick to it.
I always check will because then that saved my ass once. So for a deadline, because I got a reprieve because it was a holiday.
It's up to the individual. If I get
Just
if I
saying,
get sent one,
you know.
if I get
I'm
sent one
will
on the
not.
listing site, I always change it. Here we go. Cause of loss, insurance damage to inclusions and services, condemnation and walkthroughs. What does this mean? Pertaining to closing date. Who's responsible for the property up until the day of closing?
Seller.
Seller. Seller's responsible. That's all that's saying, that the seller's responsible for the condition of the property all the way up until closing. The buyer also has the right to do a final walkthrough prior to closing. Does anybody do walkthroughs or does not do walkthroughs? Does. I would always encourage to do a walkthrough. Who should elect not to do the walkthrough?
Buyer.
The buyer. Don't let that decision fall on your shoulders, because if you don't do the walkthrough, they close, and then the condition's not in the condition that they know it should be in. We're liable at that point.
Get it in writing.
Get it in writing. Exactly. Oh no, we don't need to do a walkthrough. Let's make sure that's in writing.
Go ahead and message me that.
Any thoughts? This is just saying that the seller will leave it in the condition that it should be in. That they're responsible for carrying insurance till the end. They're responsible for any damages. It's their responsibility. Section 20, what does it mean?
Hola.
That means you should call Tom. Miss.
Call Thomas. We shared his number earlier. Seek legal counsel. If you have any questions about any of this, I'm not your attorney. I'm your real estate agent.
Sorry, guys. Let's go.
21, time is of the essence, default and remedies. Thomas, you have thoughts and feelings about this one?
Well, just as far as time is of the essence means a deadline's a deadline and a deadline time is a deadline time. So time is of the essence. And but before I became a lawyer, I was asking, I'm like, what the hell does this mean? Of course, time is of the essence. No, that specifically is a deadline's a deadline, period. So if you blow a deadline, you've waived or you have terminated or whatever else. So that's what time is of the essence is. And then with regards to normally everything is under that liquidated damages and it's your earnest money that's at dispute unless you check that specific performance. So I'm trying to remember situations where I've actually checked specific performance, and usually it is when you're getting a off-market property at a really, really, really good discount, you know, and the buyer wants to make sure that they're buying that property, period. And so they'll check the specific performance.
I guess describe it to us. What does it mean?
Specific performance is that the contract will be, you know, fulfilled, so to speak. You're basically locking that property up. Specific performance is if that buyer is in default, the seller is going to try to make the buyer perform. Buyer can't really perform. Who cares? You know, it's somewhat squeezing the lemon as far as going to court and getting a judgment for specific performance. Well, if the buyer can't get the money, the sellers, no matter what, they can't perform. They'll just declare bankruptcy and this contract will be tossed.
Well, and if this box is checked, what happens? I guess what do the damages look like? What happens? What happens to the earnest money?
Oh, their earnest money's gone.
Gone. Gone.
Yeah, their earnest money is almost always going to be gone.
Right.
That's
Unless
unless
the-
liquidated damage.
I mean,
unless the seller
serious
gives it up.
litigation can happen here too, right?
Oh, yeah, you can always litigate.
Yeah.
Even under that section 23 for mediation, if you read that last sentence, nothing in this section provided either party filing a lawsuit or recording a lis pens.
Yeah, it's mediation, not arbitration.
Mediation is required, but you're only required to file for it. You can
So
file a lawsuit. You can file a lawsuit before the mediation happens to lock.
Yeah,
the
you
property
you
up.
file the mediation, you don't even have to go. You just have to file it.
Correct.
You agree to file it, not go.
Yes.
There you
Yep.
go. There's the loophole. Here's one. Here's kind of a little kind of special scenario. Seller default. When would this actually be at a buyer's disposal, or maybe at a buyer's need? Buyers usually have the rights to terminate throughout most of the contract. When would this maybe be a scenario? And what does it mean?
Well, let's say the seller lost his job and was unable to qualify for the loan for the next property. So he decides to say, hey, I'm not selling because I don't have any place to go.
Well, I mean, that's a scenario where now the seller decides just not to fulfill the commitment. How does that look, Thomas? If a seller decides they're not going to sell?
The seller decides they're not going to sell. You can see in that second sentence where it says, as being in full force and effect, and buyer has the right to specific performances or damages or both. So basically, seller says, I'm not selling. I don't care. Buyer says, I want this property, damn it. You file a notice lis pens.
Liz
And
Penance.
basically the buyer files the notice lis pens. The notice lis pens is a public record saying that there is litigation pending. And because there's litigation pending, the title company, the title is now clouded, right? Nobody is required. They can go ahead and get another buyer under contract, but that buyer is not required to purchase a litigation. So basically, nobody's going to buy if there's a notice lis pens.
Well, here's kind of another side to this too, though, is in a seller default situation, the buyer elect to treat this contract as canceled. Let's say your buyer gets through the loan termination portion and then decides they don't want to purchase. And let's say you get 3 days to closing and the seller doesn't complete the resolution items. The seller becomes in default from not completing the resolution items, allowing then the buyer to treat this as canceled as well. So I
Because
think
the
that
seller is in default. They have not lived up to their end of the bargain.
they didn't do what they said they were going to do. Therefore, they're in default. Buyer, do you want to cancel this? No, I still want to move forward. Well, great. We can still force them. We don't have to close until they do complete those, though. Legal fees, costs and expenses. Super straightforward.
Yeah, to the prevailing party.
To the prevailing party. Mediation, we all agree to mediation. Filing it, apparently not going to it. Earnest money disputes. I guess any big picture thoughts on this one? We read earlier that there's 3 days.
3 days.
3 days for an earnest money dispute. If there's no dispute, either give me my money back or file a mediation. 25, termination, rights to terminate and effective of termination. Is there a right to terminate? Yes. We usually know where they are. I hope we know where they are.
I hope we
We
know.
wrote them in the dates and deadlines.
And it's just a checkbox on the form.
I love that.
I don't have to
Remind
give any
everybody once-
reason.
Say it again, Thomas.
I don't have to give a reason. I just have to check a box.
I upset a lot of people by not saying why.
And
My seller wants to know. Great.
yeah, and if your seller wants to know, any of the 5 reasons listed in section 10.3 are adequate.
Right. There you go. We don't share our buyers' reasons for termination. We just share the box that we checked. Entire agreement, modification, survival, and successor. What does this mean? What do you got, Thomas?
Well, basically, it's you have the parties. If the seller passes away, it now goes into the estate, but the estate is still bound by the contract. So even though mom has died, well, now it's just basically on the the estate to clean the house out such that it can be sold.
And it's saying the benefits and obligations of this contract
Correct.
then become those individuals.
Correct.
Notice delivery and choice of law, physical delivery, electronic notice, electronic delivery, choice of law. What does this mean? That we can deliver this however needed. We can give this by hand. We could do this electronically through email. We could fax it.
Lately, I've had people putting in their CTM e-contracts.
There you go. I
I've
think it still
never done
falls
that.
under electronic delivery.
Right, right.
It's more specific.
Mhm.
Notice of acceptance and counterparts. This proposal will expire.
Yep.
It has an acceptance deadline and a date and time. What if we surpass the date and time? Can we revive it?
Now you can, yes, with that revival form.
You might as well just rewrite it.
Might as well rewrite it. I can.
Might as well rewrite it. There you go. What's good faith?
Well, you're being trusting.
There you go. I like that. That everything that you're putting in here and everything that you're saying and everything you're committing to is within good faith. That you agree to these terms and to these financing conditions, obligations, title, insurance, record title, off title, that each party is actually in good faith entering this agreement. Additional provisions. This is kind of a little play box. Thomas, should we be putting stuff in here?
Of course you can. It's they're going to say that somebody can say that it's not contractually binding because you're not an attorney, but you can still absolutely put all you want in those additional provisions.
And this
I
is
thought
usually
Colorado law stated that real estate agents are an attorney in as much that they do complete the contract and fill in the boxes.
Correct. Stay color within the boxes.
That is a big box there.
Correct.
You can put as much color in it as you want. I think that
one
this is
one of these arguments where you write something in there and it's binding, where somebody's going to say, no, you're not an attorney, it's not binding. Well, and at that point you're going to have to be before a judge. It's gotten so messy, you should have walked away in between anyway. So
Yes.
in additional provisions, you can write stuff in there and have it be binding. You just, as far as what you're putting in there, you have to be specific with your language because you don't want it to be too loosey-goosey and open to where it literally kind of has no effect, if you will. And if you got stuff that needs to be put in additional provisions, I can absolutely, Scrivener stuff, and I would proceed it with, these additional provisions have been prepared by Thomas B. Dijon, ESQ, attorney at law in the state of Colorado, number 48978. And then put in the provisions afterwards.
Did you make reference to the lease agreement, pre-occupancy in there to make sure that they're aware of what's going on so that it's written out?
Yeah, you could do that in additional provisions or other documents.
Okay, all right.
other documents right here.
The lease is part of the contract.
This is only saying post occupancy is also part of the contract.
Yes.
And then this is saying that there's other documents associated, but not actually part of the contract. Last little thing, super straightforward, signatures, contact info. Broker's acknowledgement and compensation disclosure. Broker does or does not acknowledge receipt of earnest money deposit. I never have earnest money, so does not have.
It's not.
A broker is either buyer's agent, transaction broker, or it's a change of status, or you're treating them as a customer. And then who pays the compensation? It's paid by a listing broker, buyer, or other
Listing.
listing, unless buyer's paying. For sale by owner might be an example.
Yes.
And then obviously this is auto-populated by the listing agent themselves. And we are done. Any questions, comments? Wishes, hopes?
You have my cell phone number. If you have any questions whatsoever, negotiation tactics, if then scenarios, la, 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 la. That's my cell phone number. You can either call, and if I don't answer, text me.
Love it. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everybody. You guys have any
Thank you.
questions, reach out. Have a great day. Make it good. Get out there, do some prospecting Wednesday. Why not?
Thanks, Jared.
Thanks,
Thank
guys. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.